relatively simple. We won't be covering that stuff today. What we are going to look into is essentially looking at the telephony-based aspects of a global rollout that you need to be aware of, that you need to plan for, and that you need to find solutions for at a local level. Because often those local sites will have recognized a particular requirement, implemented a local requirement, and that didn't need to be known about up the chain because it's only needed to be known locally. So this is where we can start to sort of look at those local oddities and those local challenges that you're going to face, map those out, plan the solutions around them, and then move from there to the bulk work, which we'll come to in future episodes. So I think that, the first steps here, Zach, would be really a discovery and assessment phase.
Yeah, the number of customers that I've worked with where we've agreed, we're starting to roll out a site, and then there will be, one site manager that will go, do you know we have a lift phone? And then everybody goes, oh my God. Right, okay. We've not accounted for this, or we've not accounted for that. And that there are a certain number of devices that people will, because maybe they don't get used a lot, or they just forget that they're attached to their current PBX system. Mm-hmm. These are things such as analog requirements is a big one. So like I mentioned, a lift phone, or, just analog phones. Let's say you're in a factory environment with quite a large area to cover. You may have analog phones placed around your estate rather than, standard Ethernet fed phones, for example.
I think, analog phones, you'd be looking at those sort of scenarios. I've also seen analog devices used as a common area device. One of the most common ones is in manufacturing and in food works where mobile devices aren't allowed on the factory floor at all for cleanliness reasons. In a lot of those estates, or a lot of those companies, there'll be a fixed analog device in a break room where people have to leave the working environment to then place or receive a telephone call.
Yeah. And you mentioned another one there, but things like portable phones. So DECT infrastructure, that's something that's commonly forgot when it comes to your PBX. That may be connected currently, and if you were to move to Teams without a solution, could potentially stop working.
And those DECT ones, sorry to interrupt, but those DECT phones, they're very tricky because a lot of the times they'll be, at least in my experience, there'll be a proprietary, they use the DECT protocol. DECT is it's just another wireless protocol, the same as Wi-Fi is for all intents and purposes. But the devices that use DECT will use their own protocol over DECT. So, Alcatel-Lucent is the one that I'm most familiar with. I'm actually a Alcatel-Lucent specialist, or I was once upon a time, an ACSE. And yeah, their DECT phones just won't work over any other infrastructure. So that's something to be very, very careful about.
Another type of device are, let's take the factory scenario again, paging systems. Mm-hmm. Things like speakers, it's very easy to forget about those, and you still pick up a phone and dial a number to speak through those paging systems or speak through those speakers. So making sure that these are not forgotten about and that they're swept up in your site surveys and discovery steps is really important.
Absolutely. Gosh, what other analog devices would we'd be looking for? Door phones and gate phones. Look for, you might have a security office at the edge of a campus that is serviced by an analog device, because the brilliant part about analog versus other types of infrastructure is that it is a very long throw. An analog line can stretch for quite a ways as compared to, say, an Ethernet line, like a Cat6 line. So there are reasons why analog would have been selected in the past, and those are the sort of things to look for. And fax.
Yeah, I was going to say the dirty word of fax.
Definitely.
Not,
I mean, it's
um,
a lot of places we find, like here in Australia, it's basically not used at all anymore. And it's kind of, okay, we've moved on. We use DocuSign, we use, other mechanisms for moving our documents around, but there are certain regions where faxing is still considered to be the most reliable and secure version of sending documents about. And it may be that you do still need to provide that solution to those users.
yeah, I mean, with my customers, the conversation we always have is, can this be moved to an electronics fax service? You're talking about Teams. Let's talk about the cloud as much as possible. Let's talk about moving things like that. And there are a number of electronic fax services out there that can offer what you need for your faxing needs. But if there is the requirement for a fax machine to stay physical and stay on site, it's important to make sure that you're not forgetting about that until you've rolled out, you've ported your numbers, because that's when things are going to start breaking, and then you're going to be scrambling to try and find a solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's been so many times in the past where we've worked with a customer, and this isn't just Teams. This is back to my PBX days, when someone had forgotten about some person who lived in an office, in the bowels of a building, and when the migration happened, they were like, "Where's this guy's phone?" Well, you didn't put it in the data collect. We need to capture all of this information. And so, it is definitely something that you need to go over with your local people with a fine-tooth comb and go, do we have any analog requirements? Do we have any paging requirements? What are our portable systems? One of the other ones which I've seen occur, and I had this happen to me when I was rolling out a Skype for Business solution, was we had a low vision user who used a large magnifying device, like a magnifying glass, and a very large button phone. And when we were rolling out Skype for Business, the decision was made by the business to not implement hard phones. They wanted a full soft phone solution, and we struck that as a problem. Now, thankfully, there are solutions for that, which leads us neatly into, let's talk about modern solutions. So if we've discovered all of the things that we need to worry about, how do we address those problems? How do we make sure that we've implemented the solutions that that fit the niches that each of these sites may have? And so, I mean, let's start with accessibility, because I think that's the easiest one to really look at, because Microsoft, as a software house, they design around accessibility every day. And any vision impaired or anyone who requires a text to speech, or a speech to text, or a teletypewriter, or a high contrast, low vision mode, if that suits them right now, then we have the technology to do that, and it's already built into Teams. And in fact, your people with those requirements may already have those solutions turned on so that they can operate effectively. So moving Teams calling into Teams will utilize the same technology that they're already using to use Teams, because it's the same piece of software. So far as the analog devices go, I mean, let's pull that apart a little bit and start talking about some of the different applications and what some of the solutions are.
Yeah, Microsoft tackle this in a really unique way, I believe. So there's something that Microsoft have called the Microsoft SIP Gateway, and this is effectively a service where you can register devices such as ATAs, which we'll come on to with more analog requirements, and some older SIP phone devices as well. So for that common area scenario that you could have across your estate, there's the ability to potentially even reuse equipment that you already have if it's compatible with the SIP gateway, and may need a firmware upgrade, for example, to be able to talk to Teams. But once that's in place, then that phone can be reused just to communicate with the SIP gateway. Alternatively, Microsoft have the devices website, which is a list of their certified Microsoft Teams devices. This has everything from phones. We're talking from what we call dumb phones, or nothing with a touch screen. Very simple entry level requirement phones, all the way up to things like there's even meeting rooms devices on there, or panels, that sort of thing. All covered on there.
And I mean, I think one of the big things that I think we kind of skipped over on the first part, and maybe we should just jump back to that. A lot of the times I need a telephone, like a physical telephone, or our executives require telephones in this particular office. That is something that we get raised as a problem when we're scoping. And there are solutions for that. I mean, I have my own feelings on hard phones for users. I think, from my personal point of view, your mileage may vary, but I think that my mobile phone is the portable, it's the hard phone that I use the most, and it is capable of being the difference between Teams phone and the Teams app on mobile is, Teams phone is actually less capable because it's just the phone elements. Whereas on my phone, I have all of my chat and Teams and apps and the whole shebang. So, but if there is a requirement for a physical telephone, and that could be an executive, it could just be a courtesy phone in a reception area, right? Mm-hmm. So those devices on that website range all the way from, as Zach mentioned, dumb phones all the way through to high-end desk phones. There's meeting room devices, there's panels. I think it's also very useful to use that as a resource for headsets, for example. We're not using, I'm using a Teams certified headset, but I'm not talking to you on a Teams certified headset, and nor is Zach. But from a user perspective, using a certified headset always provides a better experience for both people in the call or all people in the meeting, just because of ease of connectivity. And they're certified to work with Teams out of the box without any firmware updates or anything like that required. They generally conform to they conform to certain levels of quality and functionality that Microsoft put them through to make sure that they're suitable for use. And for most Teams devices, they have a good level of noise cancellation to remove background noise. So, the boom mic in my headset has 6 microphones, which are trained and designed to block out anything but my voice. And then when coupled with Teams onboard AI noise cancelling, it makes for a very pleasant experience for all involved.
Yep.
So those are our SIP devices, analog devices via an ATA. We've talked about SIP devices and using the Teams SIP gateway, which, that's such a great feature. Moving portable phones across can be relatively straightforward. Using portable phones can be relatively straightforward. I think there's a really good story to be told here about the different ways, and we've got a blog post that's coming up about, different types of mobility and more modern mobility. So while we have DECT and Wi-Fi based phones available, I just deployed a solution in China which reused their existing Wi-Fi based SIP phones in their manufacturing area. So absolutely a possibility. There are also some devices that we can talk about, and again, they'll be in that blog post, that are more modern and allow you to do more things. So, there's like wearable technology that can be deployed into a factory environment. So you can not just make and receive calls, you can make and receive video calls or participate in a meeting, which is pretty. It's pretty impressive when you start looking at those capabilities and start applying. Okay, well, instead of just replacing what we have, why don't we move that to something a bit more grown up, a bit more technologically advanced and a bit more flexible.
Yep. Yeah, there's some even products on offer around DECT from companies like Poly. They do the Rove solution, which is a fully Teams, DECT solution. Or with that SIP gateway that we mentioned previously, there are some other models from, I think Alcatel are actually on the list as well as being a provider that will work with the SIP gateway. So depending on what version of portable phones that you have across your estate, if you're not looking to kind of replace those assets straight away, then there's the availability that they can be reused.
Well, I think that reuse is very attractive too, right? If you've already outlaid a lot of capital on a large amount of DECT phones, or in the case of SIP handsets that are compatible with SIP gateway, great, keep them, pair them, use them, sweat those assets until they're no longer required, and then either replace them with something more modern or retire them and move to a fully mobile solution where possible. So yeah, you really do have a lot of options there, and I think that's not something that I've really had an experience with before moving into the Microsoft world, considering, well, that was like 10 years ago. So, but yes, in the PBX world, I never had that luxury. So it's quite exciting. I think the other one to talk about modernizing, and we touched on it before, but fax is definitely something that is possible to heavily modernize. I mean, you mentioned eFax earlier.
Yeah, so there's electronic fax solutions such as Ritarus, eFax, Ferrari fax. There's electronic fax solutions out there that you can use, and then depending on your provider, you can put forwards on numbers or unconditional forwards to make sure that those fax numbers stay in place once ported, and you're able to keep using faxing. But alternatively, if there has to be a fax machine on premises, or there has to be a physical fax machine, there needs to be a way for that to speak to Teams. Depending on your Operator Connect provider, I know we discussed this briefly on our Dispelling the Myths of Operator Connect webinar and blog post, but if you have the right provider, what you can do is offer SIP trunks from them. So if that provider can offer you SIP trunks that can terminate on an ATA device, so that's an analog telephony adapter that then has your fax plugged in, if their network is configured to be able to take that T38 full fax all the way through the carriers as well, you're going to be able to retain that physical fax machine for as long as you need.
Absolutely. And I mean, that really extends to any SIP devices that are on-prem. You might have SIP door phones, and that door phone may not be on the supported list of devices for the Microsoft SIP gateway. So, with the right Operator Connect provider, they could look at saying, all right, well, let's provide a virtual SBC on-prem to act as a registrar for those devices, and then provide SIP trunks into that virtual SBC, so that, okay, well, those numbers can still be served to those devices. That device, when you push a button, it can still dial a code, and that code doesn't need to change. Like, it could be a 4-digit code, for example, to dial through to reception. On the SBC, your provider or your internal IT staff could, change that and transform that into the full E164 number, send that through to Teams. Okay, it's ringing on reception. It functions exactly the same way. It's just connected in a slightly different manner. So there's a number of different ways, and that SBC Connect version is, I think, a great example of being able to retain existing SIP infrastructure wherever possible, if it's not supported by the Teams gateway.
Well, just to mention with the SIP gateway as well, a number of analog telephony adapters have actually been certified now for that SIP gateway.
Yep.
So audio codes do a large number of devices. Poly, the OBI infrastructure works. So there are a number of ATAs that are currently certified to work with the SIP gateway. The only thing to bear in mind there is only voice loads can go over that SIP gateway at the moment. So fax will not work, but things like door phones, lift phones, just analog phones that are around for use, they can go over those ATAs and then up to the SIP gateway.
Yeah, I think it's probably not best that we go too deeply into the ins and outs of it, but fax is just encoded slightly differently because of the way that the data is carried across the line than voice is, and it's a lot more complicated. It's not a lot more complicated. It's more complicated, and quite frankly, it requires it's more difficult to do than just voice. So as a result, voice is the bigger load anyway. Like most places, as we mentioned earlier, have looked at moving away from fax either to an electronic fax solution, or in a lot of cases, I mean, we're fully paperless at LoopUp. We have no needs for printing out documents or anything, because we use M365 as our primary method of doing everything. But yeah, for example, for contracts and any official documentation that needs signatures, we use DocuSign for that. So and other digital signing mechanisms are available, but there are digital solutions that can move you towards a paperless office, or transform you completely towards a paperless office. So that is definitely something to consider.
Yeah. One of the last workloads I did want to mention is around the paging systems as well.
Oh, yes.
So, if you're in an environment or have a site with, paging requirements or speakers, alerters, that sort of thing, a company's list of devices have quite recently become certified on the SIP gateway, and that's the Algo Solutions devices. So these are devices that can connect directly to that SIP gateway, as we mentioned before. So there's paging systems where you can hook in your existing speaker systems that are around your estate, and still, dial, 331, and then that will go through to the paging system via number translation, and then you're able to ring over those speaker systems. There are things like visual alerters. There's even door phones and door controllers, all certified now for the SIP gateway.
There you go. Excellent. Okay, so with that taken care of, and once you've peeled apart all of those, really, I think that those are the most difficult components. Those are the things that are going to require the most digging and the most checking to make sure that you've got them done. But the good news from here on in, as far as I'm concerned, is once you've figured out these special components, the rest of the solution is, it's still complicated. I'm not going to lie. Like, there's still stuff that we need to talk about, and we'll get to that next week, where we discuss the telephony components of Microsoft Teams, how they go together, and what feature sets we can look at, and how we can customize Teams. But that's relatively straightforward and relatively similar per site, meaning that the Operator Connect migration mechanisms that are available to you are relatively straightforward and simple, in that once your tenant is authorized, once your numbers are ported, once your users are activated, you're done. You're ready. You're on the platform and you're good to go. But I'm not gonna trivialize it and say that it's simple. There's still stuff to talk about. So what else should we leave off with here before we step away? I think if we loop back to the Dispelling the Myths of Operator Connect webinar, that's one where we go a little bit deeper into what Operator Connect can do. I mean, there's a lot of people out there that think that the things that we've just discussed isn't possible from a cloud-based solution, but it absolutely is. And there's some more information there that that you might find handy, as well as probably the keep your eyes peeled for the blog post about teams in manufacturing environments.
Yep.
Zach, anything else that you'd like to add?
No, that's perfect.
Fantastic. All right. Zach, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And to everyone out there, thank you very much for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed this webinar, and we'll be back next week to talk about the depths of Teams features and what you can expect to get into and be able to deploy with Teams Operator Connect. Thanks for joining us.
Cheers all.